My name is Ryan Wood and this is RWood Outdoors. On today's episode of RWood Outdoors, I'm going to show you how to do a plastic weld repair on a cracked kayak. And most importantly, how to do it without spending a lot of money. I've got my trusty Wilderness Systems Ride 135 kayak. This is an older model boat, 2008, and in my opinion, one of the best decks that they've ever done. So I want to get a few more years out of this thing. And unfortunately, I've developed a little crack around one of the scupper holes, and we got to get that plugged so I don't take on water. It's going to be a pretty simple process. Let me show you how it's done. So I've had a small crack develop right around the scupper hole, and when I take this kayak out, it takes on a little bit of water, and me tending to do a lot of ocean and long distance trips, I really need to make this a seaworthy vessel again. So I'm going to get this crack repaired, and the technique I'm using is a plastic weld to basically fill in the crack with new plastic material and seal it right up, and that's the strongest way to repair a kayak. Let's see how it's done. Before we get started with this repair, I want to give you a quick RWood Outdoors organic chemistry lesson. So most modern kayaks are made out of a material called polyethylene. And polyethylene is a thermoplastic material, which in essence means that I can melt it over and over and over again and still get really good mechanical properties every time. That's in contrast to a material like an epoxy, which is a thermoset, and once that is cured for its first time, it's basically done. So a repair on an epoxy would be done by adding a filler adhesive that actually glues the two materials together. But in this case, with a plastic polyethylene, I'm going to do a weld repair where I'm taking new polyethylene plastic and welding it back to the original material by melting them together. Let's see how that works. The number one most important thing to remember when attempting a plastic weld repair is that your weld filler material must be of the same exact kind of plastic as your base material. So as I just mentioned, a kayak is made out of polyethylene. So my weld filler material, I picked this $1 mixing cup that also happens to be made out of polyethylene. If you can see that, you see the HDPE, that's your high density polyethylene. So even though my color is not the same, if that's important to you, you can match colors as well. But this is what I'm going to use as my weld rod. A 5-gallon bucket, another good example of polyethylene, but you don't want to mix a different kind of plastic such as polypropylene or nylon or ABS or something different, because the weld won't be very strong. So let's get started, and I'm going to cut this guy up and make some weld rod. Okay, I've got my inexpensive mixing cup, and I'm going to cut this up into some smaller pieces to make my polyethylene weld rod. Just got a pair of scissors, and I'm going to slice this up. Okay, that's really all I need to get started. Just a nice strip of polyethylene plastic from my mixing cup to use as a weld rod. So an important lesson I'll share is that sometimes before you can make something better, you have to make it a little worse first. And that's what I'm gonna do here. I've got that crack which I showed you earlier in the video, and it's actually really thin, and I need to open it up a little bit so I can actually get the plastic in there. It's gonna give me some fresh plastic that I've recently melted, which will be better for bonding to. So I'm just going to take my soldering iron here and just gently melt the material. My next step is to take the polyethylene plastic from my mixing cup and basically lay down a weld bead using the soldering iron. I'm not worried too much about keeping it neat at this point. I'll come back and clean it up, but I just want to lay down a lot of material so that I can fill that crack. And I'm just using the soldering iron just enough to melt out the plastic to get it to flow, and then I'm moving on. So I've got a nice weld bead of plastic laid down over the crack, and it's flowed down into it. And now all I have left to do is some cleanup. So I've got a razor blade, got a little sandpaper, and we're just gonna make it look nice. Well, there's the finished product. I've filled the crack with the welded polyethylene and sanded it smooth, and no burrs or anything like that to speak of. I've obviously used a different color plastic for the purposes of this video so you could see the contrast, but had I used the natural green that the Kayak was in, you could hardly tell that a repair was done. Not a bad way to fix a Kayak with a super strong repair on a budget. And now the final test to see if it's waterproof. So I've got no bubbles coming up from inside the Kayak. Looks like we got a good repair. Well, there you have it. I've completed my plastic weld repair on the crack in the scupper hole of my Kayak, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job of it. It's going to be watertight and definitely a seaworthy vessel once again. If you enjoyed this episode of RWood Outdoors, be sure to hit the subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. We're posting more informative and entertaining episodes all the time. My name is Ryan Wood, and we'll catch you next time.